Until about 20 years ago, the vision of an autonomous car seemed like science fiction. It seemed almost inconceivable. But now we can say with a certain degree of confidence that we are in the midst of a revolution. And Israel is at the forefront with over 500 companies that are making innovation in this field much more practical than ever before, beginning with startup companies that develop the systems that enable autonomous driving and development and innovation with leading car companies worldwide. We'll talk about the trends and the autonomous vehicle industry, and we'll talk to people who are leading this revolution. Michal Wולקין is from California, an innovator and a developer. She served as CEO of Lear in Israel and CEO of Lear Innovation Ventures, the global capital venture capital fund. Now she is head of she works for a foundation that invests in startup companies. I'm honored to introduce Michal Wולקין. We will also be talking to Omer Killeff. I met Omer for the first time about 7 years ago when he took a sensor and showed me how I could be sure that the watermelon that I was choosing would be sweet enough. Since then, he has jumped from one company to the next, and I'm still doing basically the same thing. But today, he is still working with sensors. 5 years ago, he and friends from the army founded Innoviz, an Israeli company that develops LIDAR technology, a laser tool that scans the area and enables autonomous cars to see its surroundings. In 2018, the company won the Atlas Award, and it was a good bet because 6 months ago the company was issued on NASDAQ. I'm honored to introduce Omer Killeff. So before we start talking about autonomous cars, I said before that Innoviz won the Atlas Award. I understand that this statue is quite an attraction in your offices. Yes, absolutely. First of all, it's at the entrance to our offices. It's very impressive. It attracts a lot of attention. And whenever someone comes to the office, we give them a tour of our offices. And that's a point that we stop during this tour, because this statue has presence. And it reflects a journey. It shows someone carrying something heavy on his back, carrying the world to a new place. And in many ways, this was, of course, part of the Atlas Award, and I tell them it's the Atlas Award, the Ayn Rand Center, and this relates to a lot of our values as a company and an organization. It's very important to us. We are committed to our mission. It's not an easy one, but we're carrying the world on our shoulders. I think you're doing quite a good job. We do our best. So that was the easy part. And before we jump into the industry and try to understand where it stands, let's start with the end. I said it before that for 20 years we've been talking about the revolution in autonomous cars. When do you think we'll be able to use them on a regular basis? I think it's a question that I've been asked dozens of times, if not more. Does the answer change, or do you have a date? I think it's an excellent opportunity to ask again, because there was a break. Over the last 2 years, there was COVID. There weren't conferences. There were fewer cars. The car industry was focusing on survival, and it seemed like there was a stop on it, putting a stop to investments in infrastructure and in different aspects of the this sector. But on the other hand, we saw that over the course of this period, there was a digital transformation revolution, and most of this revolution showed us that you can't stop processes that have already begun. And one of these processes, one of the technologies that we heard about, AI, artificial intelligence, is the main engine that drives the field of autonomous vehicles. And this is a new sensation. So to answer your question, I don't think the process is stopped. We will see autonomous cars, and if we're talking about a robotaxi, not a car that's limited or a car that anyone could take, I think it'll be available in most cities around the world in about 10 years from now. 10 years is a very long time. There will be cities where we'll see it much sooner, possibly within 5 years. It depends on the cities, because like in Israel decided to give the COVID vaccine earlier, there will be cities that'll take the risk. So when you're talking about 10 years, we're talking about stage 5 cars that drive completely alone. Yes, I'm talking about stage 5 that drives completely alone. And I'll tell the audience that in California, the mayor in California approved use of a robotaxi for Waymo, a Google company, and Cruise. And very soon we'll probably start seeing people taking these robotaxis. Waymo decided to do it with the safety driver, and Cruise decided not to in compliance with the requirements. And we see it today. I think that regular private cars, even though Elon Musk says that the Tesla car is ready for full autonomous driving, it will take some time. The regulators won't approve it very soon. But autonomous trucks we should be seeing in 2023 or 2024 and beyond the pilot projects that are already underway. So I think the future is a little bit closer than we thought, but the implementation will be quite gradual. Give us something a little sooner than 10 years. 2023 sounds good to me. My customers make the commitment. I'm not the one who makes the commitment. Innoviz is involved in several projects. Our goal is to enable mass production by the end of 2022 or 2023, several projects that we're involved in. And again, the definition of level 3 and level 4, there are different types of applications for autonomous cars, what's called M and P autonomous driving, which in my opinion, I think these are two separate applications. One are private vehicles in which there's autonomous driving, but only on highways, which simplifies the problem dramatically. There are no junctions, no complicated turns, there aren't pedestrians, so the validation that the car maker has to do is much shorter. So from the technological perspective, it's easier and cheaper. So BMW, for example, which is a client that we work with, is preparing to launch serial production of these type of cars in 2023. Another example are autonomous shuttles, which is also MVP because it's basically a bus that drives through an urban area, so it's more complex, but it drives very slowly on fixed routes. So in this case too, I call it MVP because the validation required is much more limited, because the routes can be tested. If you test it 100 times, and you probably cover every situation and every scenario. We're working with a European partner who plans to launch it in late 2022 or 2023, and we're working with full collaboration with a public transportation company. It's funded by the German government, and it's happening. It's definitely happening. This isn't science fiction. Michal mentioned regulation and technology. Between regulation and technology, what's the main obstacle? I think that's also a good question to ask right now, because if you asked me that question a year and a half ago when I was at Lear, I would have said that the problem was computation, cyber communications, etc. But I think that now the main problem is safety, and everything that has to do with functional safety is related to AI. We have edge cases in autonomous cars that from the security perspective, it becomes is very close to regular cars. It's measured by the number of accidents per million miles. There are edge cases in which a person can respond better than the robot, for example, in darkness or bad roads or bad weather conditions. The IA technology is in the midst of a renaissance. We see an incredible increase in growth in perception and data analytics and precision in prediction of the edge cases and solutions are progressing, but this is still the main problem. I think that another problem is the user interface. The drivers have to trust these autonomous cars. They have to be willing to use them to get into these cars. As soon, the more passengers there are, I think I started using a Tesla electric car, and I'm gradually taking a step back. As he says, drive safely. I think that what we're seeing now, and as Omar said before, most of the car manufacturers are producing level 2 and level 3. Qualcomm stated last week, Pioneer is a company that develops ADAS software and hardware. It was snatched out of the hands of Magna for $4.5 billion. And we see that they're accumulating mileage. Waymo said that they managed to accumulate also millions of miles without any accidents. Tesla, unfortunately, had 12 cases of death, but they're continuing to collect data. It's also a matter of, it's a relational issue also. It's in relation to, you have to compare it to the number of accidents when a human is driving, which is at least equal. So that is the main problem, and the solution, and we're getting closer to the solution. Omar, talk to me about regulators around the world. Are they willing to take the risk? Are they willing to make progress, to progress at the same pace as technology? You don't expect me to answer with regard to Tesla, do you? I was told not to talk about Tesla, she says. The number of accidents that happened with Tesla is not hard, but it's not an autonomous car. Most of the accidents that are avoided is because the person has to look at the road and respond to what happens. We're talking about safety in the case when the driver, when the human is not actually looking at the road, and that's the situation that we want to reach. And there's a significant gap. From the regulatory perspective, in order to reach the stage of autonomous driving, the car manufacturer must prove that the car is capable of coping with every situation without human intervention, assuming that that's our goal. From that perspective, the regulators talk about redundancy. You can't have a single point of failure that will cause a deterioration in one of the functions that will compromise safely, whether to the person inside the car or person outside the car. So with Tesla, you probably can't avoid redundancy because of the potential possibility of failure in case of bad light conditions or if water drips onto the lens, which prevents the car from understanding what is happening around it. So another sensor is needed to enable the human to fully disengage. From the regulatory perspective, there's no gap. The car manufacturers have to prove. I was just told that our time is up, but I do want you to finish your sentence and then ask you one more question before we end. Just remember that our time is up. From the regulatory perspective, it's the responsibility of the car manufacturer. They take full responsibility for driving, and they have to prove to the regulator that they did all the tests. It's just a matter of testing, and other than that, the regulator isn't playing any barriers. We have to end earlier than planned. There's so many things we want to talk about, but I think you do have something to say to Elon Musk. He said that LIDAR for the long term will become an expensive and complex solution for autonomous cars, and it's best to base the technology just on cameras and software. Can you respond? It's not just me against Elon Musk. It's the entire industry. Obviously, my voice is the most important, but there's a whole industry behind behind us. I once invited him to eat hummus with me in Israel and talk about this. When he chose to design a car, there weren't actually inexpensive lighters available in large quantities, and he didn't have a choice. He wanted a competitive vehicle that could do things that other cars could not. He did not have lighter technology, so basically he wasn't under any pressure because no one else had reached level 3. Tesla actually says that we're not level 3, we're level 2, meaning a state in which the car can take active measures, either braking or maneuvers, but can also reach full driving capabilities, but cannot take over for the human driver. But the situation, the reality has changed. There are small lighters, inexpensive ones. That's someone who didn't listen to the introduction. LiDAR is a light radar. It's a scanner, almost like a 3D video camera, that gives the car an opportunity to scan the its entire surroundings very precisely, unlike flat photos that prevent you from knowing exactly where everything is located. And a lot of the car's understanding is based on context, trying to understand what everything it sees actually is, and LiDAR gives a good perception. So if Musk had met you before, you would be in an entirely different place today. Just a final word from you, Michal. And you work with startup companies. You help startup companies. You work with them and help them mature their products and ideas. So tell us in a word how you do it. I think that it's very important to state that in Israel there's a lot of money in excellent funds. We're a unique fund because we're in Silicon Valley and we're where the revolution is happening. We're very close to our design partners, and we work with entrepreneurs. I work with 2 excellent partners, Jay Ham at Trans Capital, and together we can reach the early stage companies and help them sharpen their business and strategy. In the cases of specific cars, there are incredible technologies, but the market is taking its time. As investors, our role is to help the companies get through this period and develop business models that will enable them to be more mature and with better revenue once they reach the point that the autonomous cars can be put on the roads. And in the meantime, we invest in AI, robotics, digital healthcare. These are things that are all related to car technology. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much.